When I tell this story, I always start with that one sentence that burned into me like a brand. "You're nothing but a burden," my brother snapped across the table, and my dad, my own father, nodded, adding calmly, "Maybe it's time you stop coming around." My name is Edgar. I'm 28. And in that moment, I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I just stood up, left my half-finished plate on the table, and walked out into the night air without looking back. The strange thing is, the silence felt heavier than any fight ever could. I could still hear my brother's voice echoing in my head, still see the way my dad had leaned back like a judge pronouncing a sentence. My hands were trembling as I reached for my car keys, but I wasn't sure if it was from anger or from something else, something closer to grief. I had always known I wasn't the favorite. My brother, Aaron, had been the golden child from the day he was born. He was the one who got the new bike, the praise, the extra slice of pie at dessert. I was the helper, the one who should be grateful, the one who should sacrifice. I remember being 10 years old when my parents took Aaron to Disneyland and told me I was too young to appreciate it. I stayed with my grandmother while they sent back photos of smiling faces and mouse ears. I never told anyone how I cried into her couch pillow that weekend, staring at the clock, wondering what was so wrong with me. By the time we were older, I thought I had grown out of it. I built a life of my own, found work, made friends who felt more like family than my own blood. Still, I kept showing up to family dinners, birthdays, holidays, because some part of me still wanted that approval, still wanted to believe that if I just stayed patient, one day I'd be treated the same. But sitting at that table, listening to my dad agree with Aaron's words, I realized it was never going to change. What stung most wasn't the insult, it was the casualness. Aaron hadn't said it in a rage. He'd said it like it was a fact, like calling me a burden was as ordinary as passing the salt. And Dad hadn't argued. He'd nodded. It wasn't heat-of-the-moment cruelty, it was belief. When I left, I didn't slam the door. I didn't say a word. That was my small act of rebellion. My silence. But when I got home, the weight of it hit me. I sat on the edge of my bed and just stared at my phone, debating if I should text someone, if I should unload. Instead, I let the hours crawl by. I thought about every little moment that had led here. The times I paid my parents' overdue bills without being asked. The nights I picked Aaron up when he was too drunk to drive. The weekends I spent fixing things around their house when no one else bothered. And yet, somehow, I was the burden. I didn't realize I'd fallen asleep until my phone's vibration jolted me awake. It was barely dawn, the sun not even up, and my lock screen was filled with missed calls. 19 in total, most from Dad, a few from Mom, and even 2 from Aaron. My chest tightened as I scrolled through them, until I saw the single message waiting at the bottom. "Please, come back, we need you." I sat there, staring at those words, my heart caught between fury and confusion. Need me? After last night? After telling me to stop coming around? The contradiction dug under my skin, and I couldn't shake the thought that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't about love. Maybe it was about something else entirely. And that was the moment I realized this wasn't over. When I finally unlocked my phone and read that message again, "Please, come back. We need you." I couldn't decide whether to laugh or throw the thing against the wall. A part of me wanted to believe it meant they regretted what they'd said, that maybe Dad had replayed the night in his mind and realized how cruel it sounded. But another part of me, the sharper and less forgiving part, kept whispering, "Don't be naive. If they really cared, it wouldn't have taken 19 missed calls in one night for them to say so." I didn't answer. Not right away. Instead, I got up, made myself some coffee, and tried to shove down the ache in my chest. By mid-morning, though, the phone was buzzing again, Mom this time. Unlike Dad, she never came right out with insults. Her words were softer, polished with guilt, but they always had a hook in them. "Edgar," she started as soon as I picked up, "you shouldn't have left like that. You know your father didn't mean it the way it sounded." I stayed quiet, just letting her fill the silence. She always did. "You know your brother," she went on. "He has a temper. He says things he doesn't mean. But he was upset, and you walking out like that, it just makes things harder for everyone." There it was. Not an apology, not even an acknowledgement. Just the old family trick of flipping the blame onto me. I could picture her pacing the kitchen as she said it, twisting the story so my quiet exit became the real crime. "Mom," I finally said, my voice flat, "what exactly do you need from me?" There was a pause, too long. like she hadn't expected me to call her bluff. Then she sighed. Well, Aaron has that big interview next week, you know. He's nervous, and he asked if you could help him prep. You're better at that sort of thing. I closed my eyes and pinched the bridge of my nose. There it was. Not remorse, not reconciliation. A request. A favor, dressed up as family concern. Let me get this straight, I said slowly. He calls me a burden, Dad backs him up, and less than 12 hours later you're asking me to play coach for his interview? Edgar, don't be dramatic, she said quickly. You know he didn't mean it. He was just stressed. He's under a lot of pressure. Funny how Aaron's stress was always the explanation, but mine never even made the table. I ended the call before she could dig the hole any deeper. That should have been the end of it, but over the next few days, the phone didn't stop. Texts from Dad asking me to come over to talk it out. Messages from Aaron that weren't even close to apologies, just casual lines like, "Hey, so when are you coming by? I need to run some practice questions." As if insulting me one night and demanding my help the next was completely normal. And the worst part? A piece of me almost gave in. That old, familiar instinct to keep the peace, to be useful, to buy back a scrap of acceptance by doing whatever they needed. I thought about it more than I'd like to admit, but then I remembered the look on Dad's face when he nodded at Aaron's words. Like he truly believed it. So I stayed away. A week later, though, I caved. Not because I wanted to, but because Mom called again, her voice dripping with practiced worry. "Edgar, please. Just come for dinner. We'll all sit down and talk. It'll be good to clear the air." I should have known better. The second I walked through the door, the air told me everything I needed. There was no warmth, no apology waiting. Instead, Aaron was slouched on the couch, his tie undone, a half-empty beer on the table, smirking like he'd already won. Dad gave me a stiff nod, then immediately launched into small talk like nothing had happened. It was Mom who finally steered it toward the real reason I'd been summoned. "So," she said brightly, her eyes flicking between me and Aaron, "your brother has that big interview tomorrow. Edgar, you'll help him tonight, won't you? Just a quick run-through." Aaron leaned back, smirk widening. "Yeah, you're good at that kind of stuff, aren't you? Guess that's the one thing you're useful for." I swear the room tilted. Useful. As if my entire value boiled down to how well I could polish his answers. "Why don't you do it yourself?" I asked, my voice even. Aaron shrugged. "Because you're better at it. And, come on, it's not like you've got anything else going on. You might as well make yourself useful for once." Dad chuckled. Not harshly, not cruelly. Just that little laugh of agreement that cut deeper than a shout ever could. I didn't stay long. I walked out again, the sound of Mom's, "Edgar, don't be so sensitive," chasing me down the driveway. The pattern repeated itself over and over. Weeks bled into months, and every time I tried to hold my ground, they pulled me back with some new excuse. They needed help fixing something. They needed money for a bill that couldn't wait. Aaron needed a ride, a reference, a safety net. And every time I said no, the guilt calls rolled in. Family sticks together. You're just going to abandon us? Do you want Aaron to fail? Do you want us to lose the house? It was always framed as my responsibility, never theirs. And if I pushed back, Dad would slip in that same cutting line. "Maybe it'd be easier if you just stopped coming around." He'd say it like a test, like he wanted to see if I'd actually follow through. I started noticing little things, too. Subtle digs slipped into conversation. Jokes about how I never measured up, how Aaron was the real success, the one they could count on. Once, at a family barbecue, Dad raised his glass and toasted Aaron's bright future, then added with a smirk, "And to Edgar, who keeps the car running when it breaks down." Everyone laughed. Everyone except me. That night, lying in bed, I kept replaying the moment. The truth is, I wasn't even jealous of Aaron. I didn't want his spotlight. I just wanted respect. Acknowledgement that I wasn't the disposable one, the one they could mock, use, and discard when convenient. The tension grew thicker every visit. The more I resisted, the more blatant the favoritism became. Mom would set aside Aaron's favorite dessert while telling me there wasn't enough for everyone. Dad would hand him envelopes of cash with a wink while reminding me to be more responsible with money. Aaron himself seemed to thrive on it, picking at me with little remarks, always just sharp enough to sting but not enough to spark an outright fight. The breaking point came one night in early spring. I'd stopped by because Mom had insisted it was important, she said, a family matter. I should have smelled the trap, but part of me was still clinging to hope. We were sitting at the table again when Aaron leaned across, his voice dripping with smugness. You know, Ed, maybe Dad's right. Maybe you should stop coming around. Honestly, you just drag everyone down. Dad didn't even flinch. He nodded once, casually, like agreeing to pass the bread. I felt my throat tighten, heat creeping up my neck. I wanted to explode, to shout every hurt back at them, to finally put words to years of quiet resentment. But I didn't. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor, and walked out without a word. Again. This time, though, I didn't go home and wait. I didn't check my phone for missed calls or texts. I turned it off, left it on the nightstand, and stared at the ceiling in the dark. And for the first time, I didn't feel grief. I felt something colder, something steadier. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't just cruelty. This was a pattern, and patterns could be broken. I always thought the worst my family could do was dismiss me, treat me like background noise, or lean on me when it was convenient, and shove me aside when it wasn't. That was my version of betrayal for years, small cuts that never stopped bleeding. But the truth? That was just the warm-up. The real wound came later, and it was something I couldn't have imagined, even on my most bitter nights. It started like most things with them did, with a phone call that wasn't really a request, more a command wrapped in polite words. Mom's voice came through the line one Tuesday evening. Edgar, we need you at the house this weekend. Your father wants everyone together. It's important. Important was her favorite word. Important never meant birthdays or milestones. It meant money. It meant favors. It meant I was about to be dragged into something whether I wanted to or not. I thought about saying no. I thought about hanging up, letting their important wait until it collapsed on its own. But some part of me, habit, guilt, the last scraps of obligation, said yes. When I pulled into the driveway Saturday afternoon, the house looked the same as always. The porch sagging in places, Dad's old truck parked at an angle like he'd been too tired to straighten it. But when I stepped inside, there was a strange energy in the air. Tense, excited, almost like before a big announcement. Aaron was there, of course, dressed too sharply for a casual family gathering. He had on a pressed shirt, shiny shoes, hair slicked back like he was auditioning for some role. Mom fluttered around him, smiling too wide, smoothing invisible wrinkles from his sleeve. Dad stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching me with that unreadable expression he always wore when he thought he had the upper hand. What's going on? I asked, setting my keys on the counter. Dad cleared his throat, stepping forward. We've made a decision as a family, something that affects all of us. That phrasing made my stomach tighten. Decisions were never really decisions. They were announcements. And as a family, usually meant without you. Aaron grinned, bouncing slightly on his heels. It's about the house, Ed. The mortgage. You know things have been tight. I nodded slowly. I'd heard that line before. Tight. Always tight. No matter how many bills I covered or weekends I spent fixing leaks. Dad continued. Your brother is ready to take on more responsibility. He's stepping up. So we've decided to put the house in his name. For a second, I thought I'd misheard. What? Mom jumped in quickly, her tone sugary, rehearsed. It makes sense, Edgar. He's the one with the future here. He'll be able to refinance, handle things. It's just practical. I stared at them, the words hanging in the air like smoke. The house. Our childhood home. The place I'd poured hours of sweat into, replacing shingles, repairing floors, repainting walls when everyone else was too busy. They were handing it over to Aaron like it was a gift basket. And what about me? I asked quietly. Aaron smirked, tilting his head. You? Come on, Ed. You don't even want this place. You don't have the money or the stability to take it on. Be real. I felt my chest tighten, heat rushing into my face. So all the work I've done here, none of that matters? All the times I bailed you out, covered bills, kept the lights on. What was that? Just practice. Dad's voice snapped like a whip. Don't twist this. This is about responsibility. Aaron's ready. You've always been, well, you know. There it was. That unfinished sentence that said everything. You've always been the extra. The burden. The one who helps, but never holds. Mom laid a hand on Aaron's shoulder, beaming. This will give him a real chance. A home in his name, something to build on. And of course you'll always be welcome here. Welcome. As if I was a guest in the house I'd grown up in. My hands curled into fists at my sides, but I forced them open. So you're just giving him everything? No discussion, no fairness. Just, here you go. Aaron, take it all. Aaron chuckled under his breath. Don't act surprised, Ed. You've always known who Dad trusts more. The room tilted, my pulse loud in my ears. I opened my mouth, closed it again. Because what could I even say? They weren't hiding it anymore. The favoritism wasn't subtle, wasn't cloaked in excuses. It was out in the open, written in ink on the deed of the house I thought we all shared. I turned toward the door, ready to leave before the heat in my chest exploded into something I couldn't take back. But Dad's voice stopped me. One more thing, he said, casual, almost bored. Since Aaron will be covering the mortgage now, we're counting on you to help him get started. He'll need some support at the beginning. You'll chip in, won't you? I froze, my back to them, hand hovering over the doorknob. Chip in. Support him. After handing him the house, after calling me nothing, after years of scraping respect from the bottom of their barrel, they wanted me to bankroll his inheritance. Slowly, I turned back, my voice low. You're asking me to pay him, to support him, after you just gave him everything. Dad shrugged. Family helps family. Mom nodded quickly, as if that sealed it. Yes, exactly. And you've always been so reliable, Edgar. You'll do the right thing. Aaron leaned back in his chair, smirking wide. Don't worry, Ed. I'll make sure your money doesn't go to waste. That was it. The crack in the dam. The betrayal that burned hotter than any insult ever had. Not just taking the house, but expecting me to kneel and fund the very throne they'd built for him. Something shifted in me in that moment. The grief I'd carried for years, the desperate hope for scraps of love, it all hardened. I didn't shout. I didn't throw anything. I just looked at each of them, memorizing their faces, and walked out the door without a word. But this time, I didn't just leave. I left knowing something had changed. Something in me had broken, but not in the way they thought. Because betrayal has a strange way of sharpening things. And as I drove away from the house, their laughter echoing behind me, I realized I wasn't coming back the same man. Rock bottom doesn't announce itself with a bang. It creeps in like fog, soft and suffocating, until you realize you can't see more than a few feet in front of you. That's what the weeks after the house announcement felt like. Thick air, muffled days, and a constant heaviness pressing down on my chest. When I drove away that night, I didn't go home right away. I parked in an empty lot on the edge of town, killed the engine, and sat there with my hands on the steering wheel long after the dashboard lights went dark. The betrayal kept looping in my head, sharper with every replay. Dad's shrug, Mom's sugary, you'll do the right thing. Aaron's smirk as he leaned back in his chair. They had taken everything, my effort, my loyalty, even the roof over our heads, and twisted it into fuel for Aaron's success. I didn't cry. I thought I would, but I didn't. Instead, I felt hollow, like someone had scooped out everything inside me and left me walking around as a shell. The first real hit came a few days later when a notice showed up in my mailbox. Utilities for my parents' house. My name was still on some of the accounts, old arrangements that had never been changed because, of course, I was always the one who took care of that stuff. The bill was overdue, and scrawled across the envelope in my dad's handwriting was a note. Please pay ASAP. Aaron will settle later. I stared at it for a long time, gripping the paper so tightly it nearly tore. The audacity. They had taken me out of the house completely, handed it to Aaron, and now they were still routing the bills through me. Like I was their secretary, their walking wallet, their backup plan. For the first time, I didn't pay it right away. I set it on the counter and walked away. But every time I passed it, a war broke out in my chest. One voice hissed, leave it. Let them deal with it. The other whispered, if you don't pay, the lights will go out. Mom will call you crying. Aaron will blame you. You'll be the villain. That battle raged for 2 full days before I caved. I paid it. Not because I wanted to, but because the guilt had been hardwired into me for so long that ignoring it felt like holding my breath. That's what rock bottom looked like, writing checks I didn't want to write, not because I believed in them anymore, but because I didn't yet believe I had the right to stop. The loneliness was worse. Friends asked why I was so withdrawn, why I skipped out on gatherings, why I always looked like I hadn't slept. I shrugged them off, telling them work was busy, that I was fine. But the truth was, I wasn't fine. I was unraveling. Nights blurred into mornings where I woke up still in yesterday's clothes, the taste of bitterness coating my mouth. I stopped answering calls from my parents, then from Aaron, then even from people who cared. Every buzz of my phone felt like another weight pressing down, and it was easier to silence it than face the disappointment on the other end. The lowest point came one Friday evening. I'd worked a long shift, came home, dropped onto the couch, and stared at the ceiling for hours. My apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels hostile, like it's daring you to fill it. Around midnight, I finally dragged myself up, opened the fridge, and realized I hadn't been grocery shopping in over a week. There was nothing but a carton of eggs and half a bottle of orange juice. I sat at the table, cracked an egg into a pan, and watched it sizzle. That was dinner. Just an egg, eaten in silence. And as I chewed, I thought, is this it? Is this what my life has come to? Pouring myself out for people who call me a burden, and then coming home to eat scraps alone. That night, for the first time in years, I thought about walking away completely. Not just from them, but from everything. A darker thought than I wanted to admit, even to myself. But here's the strange thing about hitting bottom. There's a clarity in it. Once you've sunk far enough, once the weight has pressed you down so low you can't go lower, there's a shift. You stop asking how much more you can take, and you start asking what it would look like to stop taking altogether. The first flicker came on a Sunday morning. I woke up groggy, made coffee, and opened my laptop. Without really thinking, I pulled up my bank statements. Line after line showed transfers, bills, payments tied to my parents' house, errands needs, little emergencies that had somehow always fallen to me. Thousands of dollars, quietly bled away over the years. I sat there scrolling, my coffee going cold, realizing I could have taken a vacation. I could have bought myself a new car. I could have built something of my own. But I hadn't. I'd kept their lights on, their water running, their mortgage afloat. And in return, they called me nothing but a burden. That realization hurt more than any insult. It wasn't just that they took from me. It was that I let them. I let it happen over and over because I thought it was what family meant. Something in me started to stir. A tiny ember, buried under months of ash. The next time Mom called, her voice was unusually frantic. "Edgar, your brother's car broke down on the way to work. He needs you to come pick him up." I almost said yes out of habit. My mouth was open, the words on the tip of my tongue. But then I looked at the growing stack of bills on my table, at the cold egg pan still sitting in the sink, and I said, no, just one word. But it changed the entire temperature of the conversation. No? What do you mean no? Mom's voice sharpened. I mean no, I repeated. I'm not picking him up. There was a long silence, then a scoff. So you're just going to let your brother sit on the side of the road? What kind of family does that? The guilt flared in me like always, but this time I swallowed it down. He's not my responsibility, I said, and hung up before she could twist the knife. My hands were shaking afterward, adrenaline coursing through me, but under the nerves was something else. Relief. Power. Like I had taken back a piece of myself that I didn't realize I'd lost. That night, lying in bed, I thought about every moment I'd been made to feel small. Every joke at my expense, every favor taken for granted, every dismissal of my worth. I thought about Dad nodding when Aaron called me a burden. And then I thought about my own voice, steady and firm, saying no. It was a small thing, but it was the first step. Rock bottom wasn't just where I was. It was the foundation I was standing on now. And maybe, just maybe, it was strong enough to build something new. Because if I could say no once, I could say it again. And if I could say it again, maybe I could finally break the cycle. I didn't know how yet. I didn't know what it would look like or what it would cost. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of possibility. And that's when the idea began to form, quietly, in the corners of my mind. Not revenge yet, not even a plan. Just a whisper. What if I stopped playing their game altogether? What if I finally walked away, not just for a night, but for good? That whisper kept me awake, staring at the ceiling in the dark. And the longer I listened, the louder it grew. The strange thing about saying no for the first time is that it doesn't just end the favor you've refused, it plants a seed. That single word echoed in me for days. No. No to being their fallback. No to being the reliable one only when it benefited them. No to carrying the weight of a family that saw me as disposable. At first, it was terrifying. The silence after Mom hung up was heavy, a silence that seemed to stretch into the days that followed. She didn't call for 3 days straight, which was a record in our house. Normally, if I didn't pick up, she'd try again within hours. That quiet felt like a punishment, a reminder of how easily I could be iced out. But somewhere in that silence, I found something unexpected: space. With no requests flooding my phone, I actually had time to think, time to breathe, time to sit in my apartment and ask myself what I wanted. Not what they needed, not what would keep the peace, but what I wanted. And the scary truth was, I didn't know. I'd spent so long defining myself by their demands that the idea of living for me felt foreign. The first change was small: groceries. Instead of grabbing the cheapest items on autopilot, I took my time, picking things I actually liked. Fresh vegetables, better coffee, even a cut of salmon I'd usually never waste money on because there might be another emergency call to cover. That night, I cooked for myself properly: seared salmon, roasted potatoes, a salad, and when I sat down to eat, it felt like more than a meal. It felt like a declaration. This was mine. I started going for runs again, too. I'd run in high school, not competitively, just enough to clear my head. But I'd let it slip away over the years, replaced by exhaustion and obligation. One morning, I laced up an old pair of sneakers, stepped outside, and jogged until my lungs burned. The first attempt was ugly. I was out of shape, gasping by the second block, but when I stumbled back into my apartment, drenched in sweat, I felt lighter. Not just physically. Something had been released. Momentum has a way of building quietly. The more little choices I made for myself, the stronger I felt. I updated my resume, something I hadn't touched in years. I applied for jobs I never would have considered before, positions that felt slightly out of reach. Within weeks, I landed an interview for a management role at a logistics company. Walking into that office, dressed in a suit I'd ironed myself, I realized how different I felt from the man who once sat at my parents' table waiting for scraps of approval. The interview went well, better than I expected, and a week later, the call came. They wanted me. A higher salary than I'd ever earned, benefits that actually made sense, and a path upward. That night, I poured myself a drink, not the cheap beer I usually stocked, but a bottle of whiskey I'd splurged on, and toasted silently to the empty room. This wasn't just a job. It was a door, a way out. Of course, my parents found out. They always did. Mom called within days, her voice too sweet. "I heard about your new job, Edgar. That's wonderful. We're so proud of you." Proud. The word nearly made me choke. Proud. After years of calling me a burden, after handing Aaron everything I'd worked to maintain. But I kept my voice even, only replying with, "Thanks, Mom." Then came the hook. "And you'll be able to help out even more now, won't you? Aaron's been looking into renovations for the house. Maybe you could." I cut her off. "No." That single word again. Firm, sharp, final. The silence on the other end was delicious. The more I said no, the more control I gained. It wasn't easy. Every refusal came with guilt, with the echo of Dad's disapproving voice in my head, but it got easier. And with each no, I carved out more of myself. Work became my refuge. I threw myself into projects, learning fast, staying late, proving myself in ways no one in my family had ever acknowledged. My boss noticed. My coworkers noticed. Within 6 months, I was leading a team. For the first time, people looked at me with respect instead of expectation. They didn't see me as a burden. They saw me as capable. I started saving money too. Real money. Not just scraps left over after bailing my parents out. I built an emergency fund, then an investment account. I watched the numbers climb. Each deposit a brick in the wall I was building between myself and the chains of my family's control. And with that financial freedom came another realization. I could choose where I wanted to live. My apartment was fine, but it felt temporary, transitional. For the first time, I started browsing real estate listings. Not for them, not for Aaron, but for me. Quietly, without telling anyone, I began planning a move. A place of my own, where no one could call me a guest. Meanwhile, my parents' calls grew more desperate. Aaron had lost the job he bragged about, the one they'd toasted over as proof of his bright future. He'd overspent on the house, sinking money into flashy renovations that made no sense. And as the walls started closing in, they turned their eyes back to me. "Edgar, just a little help this month. He's under so much stress. Edgar, you know the house needs a new water heater. Can you cover it? You're the reliable one. Edgar, family sticks together. Don't abandon us." Each time, I said no. Calmly, clearly, without rage. And each time, their disbelief grew. It was like they couldn't fathom a world where I wasn't their safety net. The real turning point came when my company sent me to a conference out of state. It was only 3 days, But those 3 days changed everything. Being in a new city, surrounded by people who saw me as a professional, not as a pawn, it lit something inside me. I met colleagues who talked about future plans, investments, travel. I realized how small my world had been, how much I'd limited myself by staying tied to people who only dragged me down. On the flight home, I stared out the window at the clouds below and made myself a promise. I wasn't going to waste my life proving myself to people who would never see my worth. When I landed, the first voicemail waiting on my phone was Mom's. "Edgar, please, we need you to come over. It's urgent. Aaron's made some mistakes, and your father says you're the only one who can fix it." I didn't delete it right away. I listened twice, hearing the panic in her voice, the entitlement buried underneath. Then I hit delete, slipped the phone into my pocket, and walked out of the airport with my head high. Because I wasn't the same Edgar anymore. I had a new job, new money, new confidence. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of losing them. I was starting to see that maybe losing them wasn't a loss at all. The rise wasn't complete. I wasn't standing on the mountaintop yet. But I wasn't in the valley anymore either. I was climbing, steady and sure, and every step away from them made me stronger. What I didn't know then, as I sat in my apartment that night drafting a list of properties I wanted to visit, was that the real test was still coming. Because when people are used to controlling you, they don't let go easily. And my family was about to prove just how far they'd go to pull me back in. By the time the summer rolled around, my life looked completely different from the one I had left behind at that suffocating dinner table. My job had become a cornerstone, structure, respect, and even admiration, things I'd never really known before. My savings were solid, my confidence sharper, and I'd even started looking at townhouses. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving day to day. I was building something that belonged to me. But when you grow stronger, the people who used to feed on your weakness notice. And my family noticed. The calls had turned from requests into pleas, from pleas into demands, and from demands into something darker, anger. Dad left a voicemail one night that made my stomach knot, his voice hard and low. "You think you're better than us now? Don't forget where you came from, boy. Don't forget who made you." I replayed it twice, not out of fear, but because of the irony. Who made me? They'd spent years trying to break me, and now they wanted credit for what I'd become. I didn't return the call. Instead, I focused on work. That's where the opportunity came, quietly, almost by accident. One Monday morning, my boss pulled me aside after a team meeting. "Edgar," he said, "you've been doing excellent work. I'm impressed. I'm thinking of recommending you for the regional leadership program." It took me a second to process it. Regional leadership wasn't just a promotion, it was influence. It meant overseeing multiple branches, handling budgets, contracts, negotiations, real decision-making power. I nodded slowly, trying to stay calm, but inside, adrenaline surged. "Thank you," I said. "I won't let you down." 2 months later, I was sitting in a conference room with senior managers, signing paperwork that officially put me in charge of a sizable chunk of the company's operations. The salary boost was nice, but it wasn't just about money anymore. It was about standing in a position where people had to listen to me, where my decisions mattered. I didn't realize how quickly that leverage would intersect with my family until I attended a networking dinner hosted by a local chamber of commerce. I wasn't even planning to go, but my boss insisted it was good exposure. So I put on my suit, shook hands with strangers, and tried to smile through the small talk. That's when I overheard it. At a nearby table, two men were discussing contractors. One of them mentioned a small construction outfit struggling with mismanagement and debt. My ears perked up when I caught the name. It was the company Aaron had bragged about partnering with for his renovations, the one he said would take the house to the next level. I stayed quiet, just listening. Apparently, the company was in trouble. Missed deadlines, unpaid invoices, whispers of shady bookkeeping. They'd been blacklisted by a few bigger firms, and there was talk of lawsuits on the horizon. I didn't say a word at the dinner, but when I got home, I started digging. It wasn't hard. Public records, financial statements, local business forums. Within hours, I had pieced together a picture that was worse than I'd imagined. The company Aaron was tied to wasn't just struggling, it was sinking, and anyone attached to it could be dragged under too. That knowledge sat with me for days, heavy and electric. On one hand, it wasn't my problem. On the other, I couldn't ignore the fact that Aaron had probably sunk my parents' money into this mess. Their precious golden child had tied the family house to a failing contractor. It was leverage. I didn't know how yet, but I knew. Then came the second piece. One afternoon at work, I was reviewing contracts for a logistics hub project when I saw a familiar name listed among the subcontractors. Aaron. Not personally. He wasn't smart enough to land a contract on his own, but through a shell LLC he'd set up. He'd attached himself like a leech to a legitimate deal, probably thinking no one would look too closely. But I looked closely. The LLC was poorly structured, riddled with errors that any auditor would flag. It was the kind of setup that screamed incompetence and could tank a deal if exposed. My company hadn't caught it yet, but if they did, Aaron's little side hustle would go up in flames. That's when it hit me. I was standing in the very place where his reckless world intersected with mine. And for once, I had the vantage point. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice, balance. All the years I had been told I was nothing, that he was everything. They had built a house of cards for him, and now I was holding the wind. Still, I didn't act right away. I needed to be careful. If I moved too soon, I'd look vindictive. If I moved too late, the opportunity might slip away. So I did what I'd learned in my new role. I gathered information. I documented everything: contracts, public records, financial trails. I built a file that painted a clear picture of Aaron's recklessness, his failures, and the danger he posed to anyone foolish enough to trust him. In the meantime, I kept my distance. When my parents called, I let it go to voicemail. When Aaron texted, I ignored it. But I watched from the sidelines as their messages grew more frantic. Edgar, your brother needs help with some paperwork. Edgar, please call me back. It's urgent. Edgar, the bank is asking questions about the house. Can you step in? Each message was another confirmation that the golden child's shine was fading, that the pedestal they'd built for him was cracking. And with every plea, I felt the ember inside me burn hotter. One evening, I drove past the old family house. I hadn't been there in months. The porch light was flickering, the paint peeling, a half-finished deck leaning dangerously at the side. I sat in my car, watching the silhouette of my brother through the window, pacing with a phone pressed to his ear. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not the golden child, not the chosen one. Just a man flailing, trying to keep up the illusion. I should have felt pity. Instead, I felt clarity. This was the setup I'd never expected. Not one I engineered, but one that life had handed me because the truth has a way of surfacing eventually. And now I had to decide. Would I let it pass, or would I finally take control of the narrative they'd written me out of for so long? I gripped the steering wheel tighter, eyes locked on that sagging house. For years, they had called me a burden. For years, they had taken and taken, while handing Aaron everything. But the ground was shifting now, and I was the one standing on solid footing. What I didn't know as I pulled away that night was how quickly the cracks would widen, or how soon I'd be forced to step into the role I'd been denied all my life. Not the helper, not the burden, but the one who finally held the power. Revenge isn't a lightning strike. It's not sudden or explosive. At least, not the kind that lingers. The kind that makes people replay their own downfall over and over in their heads doesn't come fast. It comes slowly, like a storm creeping in across the horizon, quiet, steady, and impossible to stop once it's close enough. I knew I couldn't beat them by yelling or confronting them. That's what they expected: a blow-up, a tantrum, something they could point to and say, see? Edgar's unstable. Edgar can't be trusted. No, my revenge had to be the opposite. It had to be steady, calm, clinical, something they wouldn't even see coming until it was already done. The first move was the easiest. That file I'd built, the one filled with Aaron's sloppy LLC paperwork, his contracts, his tie to the failing construction company. I slipped it onto the desk of my company's compliance officer. No explanation, no fanfare. Just a neat folder labeled with everything they needed to know. Within a week, Aaron's little side hustle was flagged. The subcontract was pulled, his LLC blacklisted from any future bids. I didn't even have to touch it directly. The system swallowed him whole. The call started again. Mom, frantic. Edgar, something's gone wrong with your brother's business. They're saying he's under review, that he can't get more contracts. Do you know anything about this? I sipped my coffee in silence, the phone pressed to my ear, before answering simply, no, Mom. I don't. It wasn't a lie. I hadn't filed the report. I hadn't written the policies. I'd only nudged the truth into the light. And the truth did the rest. But I wasn't done. That was just the first thread. The second came from the house itself. Through the same business networks I'd been building at work, I found out more about that contractor Aaron had partnered with. They weren't just failing. They were being investigated for unpaid debts and fraud, which meant anyone with financial ties to them could come under scrutiny. And Aaron? He had tied the house to that sinking ship. I didn't go to him directly. Instead, I quietly reached out to the bank. Not as a brother, not even as Edgar. I went as a regional manager with a legitimate interest in risk assessment. I asked questions, flagged documents, highlighted the instability of the contractor and Aaron's LLC. I didn't push for action. I just pointed at the cracks and let the bank's own policies widen them. Within a month, Aaron's refinancing request was denied. Worse, the bank started looking closer at the existing mortgage. Letters piled up, the kind with official seals and bolded lines about review and potential foreclosure. I didn't need to be there to see the panic. I could picture it. Mom wringing her hands, Dad's jaw tight, Aaron pacing like a caged animal. For years, they had called me reliable only when they needed money. Now, when they needed stability, their golden child had left them dangling over a cliff. The best part? They couldn't pin it on me. They didn't even know where to start. But the sweetest move, the one I savored, came after I'd secured my own townhouse. It was small but modern, with clean lines and a backyard where I could drink coffee in the mornings. Mine, paid for by my work, my savings, my refusal to keep bleeding for them. One Saturday, I hosted a small housewarming. Friends from work, a few old classmates, people who knew me not as the burden, but as Edgar, competent, respected, someone worth showing up for. As we sat in my living room laughing over pizza and drinks, my phone buzzed on the counter. A message from Dad. Edgar, we need to talk. Things are bad. The bank. Aaron, please come. I stared at it for a long moment, then slid the phone face down without replying. My guests never noticed. They only knew me as the host, smiling and relaxed, a man building his own life. That was the real revenge, living in a world where their chaos no longer touched me. But still, I wasn't finished. Because revenge isn't just about freedom. It's about making them feel what they made you feel. For years, they had dismissed me, cut me out of decisions, treated me as less. Now, with everything crumbling, they needed me back in the fold. They needed my money, my stability, my name to fix the mess Aaron had made. And I had no intention of giving it. Instead, I began to plan a reveal. Not a loud one, not a dramatic confrontation at a dinner table, but a quiet, deliberate moment where the truth would crash over them and leave no room to spin or twist it. I started by consolidating the documents I had. Proof of Aaron's failures, the contractor's collapse, the bank's reviews. I organized them into a binder, clean, professional, undeniable. Then I added something extra, a copy of my townhouse deed, my bank statements showing the growth they had no idea about, my promotion letters. Evidence not just of their failures, but of my success. I wasn't going to shout at them. I was going to sit across a table, slide that binder forward, and let them choke on the realization that the burden had become the one thing they could never be: independent, strong, untouchable. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Mom called, her voice breaking. Edgar, please. We can't hold this together. Aaron's drowning. The house, it's slipping away. Just come. Please. Her desperation was real. I could hear it. And for the first time in my life, it didn't move me. It steadied me. All right, I said calmly. I'll come by tomorrow. When I hung up, I set the binder on my desk, resting my hand on the cover. This wasn't just revenge. This was closure. This was the moment I'd been walking toward since the night they called me a burden. And as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: anticipation. Because tomorrow, they would finally see me. Not as the helper, not as the burden, but as the man they had tried and failed to keep small. I didn't sleep much the night before. Not because of nerves, at least not in the old sense, but because my mind kept replaying everything that had led me here. Every insult, every dismissal, every night I'd lain awake wondering what was wrong with me. They had chipped away at me for years, convincing me I was less, convincing me I owed them my loyalty, my wallet, my silence. But tomorrow, the balance would shift. When I pulled into the old driveway the next afternoon, the house looked even worse than the last time I'd seen it. Paint peeling, grass uncut, the half-finished deck sagging further into disrepair. For all their talk of Aaron being the one with a future, the place had aged 10 years in one. It was poetic, in a way. The house itself was wearing the weight of their favoritism. Inside, the scene was almost predictable. Mom perched at the edge of the couch, wringing her hands. Dad sat in his recliner, arms crossed, pretending at authority. Aaron paced the floor, his shirt untucked, hair disheveled, a phone clutched in one hand like a lifeline. They looked less like a family in control and more like people waiting for a verdict they already knew was guilty. "Edgar," Mom said quickly, relief flooding her voice when she saw me. "Thank you for coming." Dad gave a stiff nod. Aaron didn't even meet my eyes. I set the binder on the coffee table and sat down, leaning back as though I had all the time in the world. For once I did. "So," I said evenly, "you said you needed me." Aaron finally spoke, his voice sharp. "The bank's threatening foreclosure. The contractor messed me over, the refinancing fell through, and they're saying we're in violation of agreements. We need money. We need stability. And," he jabbed a finger in my direction, "you need to step up." The audacity would have floored me once. Now it almost made me laugh. I opened the binder and slid the first section toward them. Printouts of the contractor's lawsuits, the fraud allegations, the unpaid debts. "That's who you tied the house to," I said calmly. "A company everyone in the industry knew was going under." Dad's jaw tightened. Mom's eyes darted across the pages, her lips moving silently as she read. Aaron snatched them up, scanning quickly, his face reddening. This doesn't mean anything. They'll recover. It's just rumors." "Rumors?" I raised an eyebrow. "That's why they've already been blacklisted from half the banks in the state? That's why their CEO fled the country 2 weeks ago?" "Sure, Aaron. Rumors." He slammed the papers back down, his hand trembling. Next, I turned to the second section. Copies of his LLC filings, riddled with errors. "This is yours. Your business. Or rather, the mess you called a business. You couldn't even set up an LLC properly. No wonder contracts are being pulled left and right." Dad frowned, finally leaning forward. "That's not fair, Edgar. He's trying. At least he's what?" I cut in, my voice sharper now. "At least he's failing with confidence? At least he's dragging you down with him instead of admitting he's in over his head." The silence was thick. Mom pressed a hand to her mouth. Aaron's fists clenched at his sides, but he didn't argue. Finally, I opened the last section. My deed. My savings. My promotion letters. All laid out in black and white. "This," I said softly, almost gently, "is what you told me I could never be. Independent. Stable. More than a burden." Mom's face crumpled. Dad's mouth opened, then shut again. Aaron just stared at the papers, his smirk long gone, replaced by something raw and ugly. "You see," I continued, my tone calm, steady, deliberate. "While you were pouring everything into Aaron, calling me useless, I built something real. I worked. I saved. I grew. And now I don't need you. Not your approval, not your scraps, not your chaos. I don't need anything from you." Dad tried to speak, his voice hoarse. "Edgar, you don't mean that." I looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I saw him not as a towering figure of authority, but as a man, small, flawed, clinging to an illusion of control that had already slipped away. "I do," I said simply. The fallout came fast. Aaron erupted first, pacing and shouting, his words tumbling over each other. "This is your fault. You've been sabotaging me, haven't you? You wanted me to fail so you could sit there and gloat. You think you're better than me now, just because you have a stupid little townhouse and some job?" I didn't answer. His rage didn't deserve fuel. Mom turned her pleading eyes on me. "Edgar, please. We're family. We've made mistakes, but this is bigger than pride. If we lose this house," her voice cracked, "this house is everything." I let the weight of her words hang in the air before replying. "It was everything to me too, until you handed it to Aaron and told me I didn't belong here anymore." Her face drained of color. She had no answer. Dad's anger finally surfaced, though it was hollow, brittle. "If you walk away now, Edgar, don't bother coming back. You'll regret it." I stood, gathering the binder and tucking it under my arm. "I already walked away, Dad, and I don't regret a thing." The room was silent except for Aaron's ragged breathing. They had no arguments left, no leverage, no golden pedestal to stand on. For the first time, They were exactly where they had always told me I was powerless. I walked to the door, my footsteps slow, deliberate. Mom whispered my name once, desperate, but I didn't look back. At the threshold, I paused, letting the weight of years press against me one last time. Then I said the words that had lived inside me since that night at the dinner table, the words that finally closed the circle. You call me a burden, but today, you learn the truth. I was the only thing keeping you standing. And now, you're on your own. I opened the door, stepped into the sunlight, and let it shut behind me with a quiet finality. And I didn't look back.